Hey everyone, my name is Jeffrey Pereira, and today I'm here at the Mayo Clinic with Dr. Hugo Guerrero, a physician scientist who leads a neurogenesis and brain tumor laboratory. Dr. Hugo is also the vice chair of the Department of Neurosurgery here at the Mayo Clinic. Dr. Hugo, so I've introduced you a little bit already, so I'd like to ask you, who are you and what do you do?
Thanks, Jeffrey. So I am Hugo Guerrero, as you said. I'm a physician scientist. I'm an MD Ph.D. here at Mayo Clinic in the neurosurgery department. And I am the vice chair of research. I lead the department in the research, particularly in the basic science efforts of the department. And I have my own laboratory here with some students and fellows working with me.
What were your pre-medical years like, say from your childhood all the way up until college?
Interesting. So I was a messy kid. I used to play a lot, putting things apart, taking things apart and breaking them, something that my parents didn't like too much. But as time went by, I learned how to fix those things that I was breaking up myself and putting them back together, etc. And this triggered me a lot of interest in science in general. I didn't experiment with biology until I was way late in high school, but before that, it was all about just learning how things work, etc. And this got me into the field of learning or becoming more interested in discovery.
Who or what inspired you to venture into medicine?
I have a brother who is a pediatrician, an older brother, of course, and he was at home when he was studying. We both went through medicine in Mexico. Usually in Mexico, you stay at home with your parents as you go through your career, as opposed to here in the U.S. And I will always be watching my brother studying long hours, etc., and explaining to me things that he was learning in school. We are 15 years apart, so it's a big gap. But I was very fascinated by a lot of the things he was learning and trying to do at school. And through that, I became interested in it. But I didn't want to have the same routine that he had. And I always thought I was not going to be interested in medicine until I was late in high school and I realized that was my thing.
What caused you to specialize in brain cancer and study brain tumors?
So when I was in medical school, I was volunteering at a laboratory. The laboratory was focused on neuroscience. And in the neuroscience laboratory, we were working on different brain cells, particularly glia. And through learning about glia, I became fascinated with the brain and how it makes us think, how it controls all of our actions, etc. And everything we are basically comes from the brain. And from there, I became more interested in neural stem cells and how in the brain, because it was an old concept that cells in the brain, neurons particularly in the brain, would never regenerate. If you lose neurons, they would never come back. And it turns out that was a lie, or that was not entirely true. There are actually neural stem cells in the brain. Those could be exploited to get some neurons back in the brain. And just learning that concept and seeing all the potential that they could have, I became really interested in neurogenesis, and through neurogenesis, as in the concept of obtaining new neurons. And through that, I landed at brain tumors.
Some of the bigger keywords throughout your work are brain tumors and glioblastoma, and now you also mentioned neural stem cells. For the people out there that might not know what these terms are, what are brain tumors and glioblastoma and neural stem cells?
Sure. Well, I could start with glioblastoma. Glioblastoma is the most malignant brain tumor. Brain tumor, just like tumors you have elsewhere in your body, these are uncontrolled growth of a part of your body that it keeps growing, and then it causes that organ to malfunction. In the brain, this also happens, and there are tumors that happen, they start growing there. They could be benign, they could be malignant. The problem is our brain is inside a skull, it's completely enclosed in it, and it's the mass effect that the tumor creates. It's always terrible for the patient. So it doesn't matter if it's benign or malignant, the patient has a poor outcome. GBM or glioblastoma is the most aggressive of these. And these tumors are extremely aggressive, extremely fatal for the patients. A patient with this diagnosis, unfortunately, they have a very bad prognosis. And it turns out that they interact and they play with the neural stem cells of the brain. And they seem to be, from the results that we are obtaining, they seem to be feeding off those neural stem cells and becoming more aggressive. And that's what we're studying.
So why did you choose to pursue an MD, PhD? And what is the most valuable thing that you think you gained from pursuing this dual degree instead of a singular MD or a singular PhD?
Yeah. Well, it's a little bit of perspective. So again, going to med school in Mexico was very different from what it is here in the United States. And back then in Mexico, we did not have an MD PhD joint program. Now there are, but back in my days, this was not an option. So my main interest was to go into science, and the only way I saw of going into science was through medicine. I didn't think of going into biology or some other careers, which are perfectly valid. But I wanted I thought of going through medicine. So I went to med school. Then in med school, I immediately, or very soon, started volunteering at a research laboratory. And from there, I realized that I did not want to pursue a residency, but a PhD. So I finished my medical school, and instead of applying for a residency program, I went to a PhD. And I went full-time in a laboratory, and I never left.
So what do the modern day approaches to therapies for brain cancer look like?
Well, for brain cancer, unfortunately, they are not that great. We are still doing the same thing that we have been doing for decades, if not longer. A patient gets a surgery, and the surgeon tries to remove as much tumor as they can. Then the patient goes into some secondary therapies. They can either be radiotherapy or chemotherapy or a combination of both, depending on the type of tumor. Unfortunately, for a tumor as aggressive as glioblastoma, the combination of these top-of-the-line therapies has a median survival of 14 months. So there's still much more work to do.
So what would you say is the future of brain cancer therapies and research, and how do you think the approaches to curing the disease will change in the next decade or so?
I think we are making a lot of progress in understanding how diverse this tumor is within a patient, and how the population has different tumors that look similar on a histology slide, but the tumor is biologically very different. So individualized medicine has a lot of future, and now with single cell technologies that can tell us the genome of a specific cell, or the phenotype of a specific cell, and how we can treat that specific cell or the pool of cells in the tumor, I think an individualized medicine approach will be the best. There is some promise or some good results that we are getting on immunotherapy and targeting cells as they invade and try to stop them from migrating that look very promising. There are some clinical trials going, some with good results, some with not so great results. But I think continue working on this is what is going to result in a good dent on this disease.
What would you say is your guilty pleasure?
I would say I waste too much time watching YouTube and watching videos on YouTube, and they can be very varied. It could be music, or it could be somebody talking about some topic that I find interesting, sometimes something completely unrelated to what I do. I just think it's interesting, but yeah, probably watching YouTube.
If you could choose one superpower, what would it be?
You're probably too young for remembering this cartoon, but there was a cartoon back in the 80s or 90s called The Freakazoid, and it's from Warner Brothers. And the Freakazoid had the superpower of knowing everything that was on the internet back in the day, right?
Yeah.
But so he would have all this power, all this knowledge, but both the good and the bad. There's a lot of bad things in the internet, right? So he would have both. But I think it's worth it. I think that would be a good superpower to have.
What is one moment when you realized you made the right career choice?
I think there are many. I think every time I talk with a student, so I'm very involved in academia. That's what I do the most. And I think every time I see a student finding some nice discovery and feeling accomplished from doing what they're doing while they're working with me, I think that is the best feeling that I can have.
Tell me about the process of becoming an MD PhD, and what are the pros and cons of being an MD, a physician scientist?
Well, personally, I'm biased. I think it's all pros. I think it's a big benefit to have both perspectives of being an MD and doing the research at the PhD. Going through the excruciating process of getting a PhD teaches you a way of doing science in a way that is, you can only get it by pursuing for a long term. Maybe not necessarily with a PhD, but most likely with it. So I think having both gives you a much broader perspective of how you can tackle a scientific question in a way that you can translate it to people.
So many of the physician scientists I have met before tend to focus on one of the two aspects of their dual degree. How would you say that you managed to implement and balance both an MD and a PhD?
So in my case, I do 100% research. I am 100% in the laboratory, and this is a decision that I made when I was still in the PhD after I finished my MD. I was doing some clinical work back in Mexico, then I moved to the US, and the licensing thing and everything, I didn't have any interest in pursuing that, so I stayed focused on the laboratory. However, if I were to have the opportunity, I think I would still dedicate most of my time to do basic science.
What was a tough time in your career, and how did it change you for the better?
A tough time in my career. Well, multiple things. Losing some family members when I was before the PhD, that was very tough. Making a decision of going to one program or another based on this situation, that was tough. And then when I moved to the United States after I finished my PhD and I came to Johns Hopkins to do a postdoctoral fellowship, you go through some really rough times. You're by yourself. I already had a son in Mexico. They had to stay, my wife and son, they had to stay in Mexico. And being here by myself, with new people, etc., was a conflicted time.
Describe the most exciting moment in your research career so far.
So right now we're implementing some technologies that I had no prior experience doing. Some high throughput analysis of how proteins change, the whole proteome changes of the cells in response to other type of cells. So when the cancer cells are in touch with neural stem cells and how they change their protein expression. We are pursuing it in a way that I had no experience, and it's really exciting to see these new results. And we are also getting some new instruments that allow us to do high throughput analysis of cell migration and proliferation in an automatic way. So this will allow us to get so much data that I'm very excited about how we're going to analyze it.
What does your daily routine look like?
Well, I think it's not different from any other profession. So in the morning I wake up, we have two kids. One goes to high school, and so he is pretty independent. Our younger, she goes to middle school, she's in 6th grade. And while we help everyone get ready for school, etc., I need to walk. We have a boxer, a 1-year-old boxer, full of energy, so I need to walk her in the morning. And then after that, I come here to work, and I have meetings many meetings during the day with my students and with colleagues, collaborators, etc. And then at night I go back, have dinner, and then have some time with the family, watch some TV, and sometimes I do some work at night. I tend to sleep really late, so I tend to go to bed quite late. So I stay working or reading or watching YouTube, and then I go to bed, and the next day is the same thing.
What would you say is the most challenging part of your job?
Well, a couple of things. So being the PI of a laboratory, you have the obligation of finding the funds to run your research and to support your people. So finding the funds is a constant challenge. You need to be thinking about that all the time. So that is a challenging thing. But probably a day-to-day thing is people come to you most of the times with problems that they are facing in their research or something else that's going on in the laboratory, and you need to have a clear mind to try to maybe not give them the answer, because sometimes you have no idea what is actually happening, but to troubleshoot with them and to go through the process with them to come up with some solutions. So I would say that's probably part of the challenge.
A lot of the principal investigators I've met in the past before have decided to take more of an administrative role where they kind of are the mastermind behind their research and aren't necessarily in the lab doing the pipetting. What type of role do you take on in your lab?
Yes, unfortunately, that is the nature of the job, and it's a consequence of what I was mentioning about you are responsible for your team, and you need to find the money for that. Something that people who are outside of this field might not realize is we need to get the money to pay for our research. The institution doesn't bring the money to us. We need to get that money from other founders, from other foundations or other sources of funds. And those other sources can be the federal government, can be foundations, philanthropy, etc. And to work on this and to secure this money takes all the time that you can imagine. So sooner or later, you become an administrator of the lab and you stop going to the lab to pipette because you just don't have the time. Unfortunately, that has happened to me. I go to the lab very little now. Also, it helps that I have brilliant people working in the laboratory. So I don't need to be there. Actually, when I go there, they get scared because I'm gonna mess something up. So it's good to have a good team that you can rely on to do their research, while they rely on you to find the money to do their research. So it's a compromise from both sides, I think.
Do you miss pipetting and wet lab?
A lot. Yeah. Just as much as I miss seeing patients. So even though I made the decision of working in the laboratory, I do miss seeing patients. It was very rewarding to talk with a patient and see them do better, etc. Thanks to whatever service you provided. I do miss that, but I'm happy with what I'm doing.
What would you say is your most valuable achievement as a physician scientist so far?
I think forming a team that I can trust and that they can trust me in this partnership that we have, and seeing that team growing and producing data and producing publications, talks, graduating students, I think that is my biggest compliment.
If you could tell the younger generation of up-and-coming scientists out there, how did you set yourself up to reach the level of success that you have?
That's interesting. When you are young in high school or in college, we see scientists as these brilliant, uber intelligent people. That is far from reality. So the people who are doing the science, we are just resilient. We're just there all the time. We fail 99% of the time, and then we just keep going, and then we get our own result. And hopefully, if everything is well planned, that 1% of success is going to be so big that it compensates for the rest of failures. So don't feel disheartened when something is not going great in school, or when you feel like you're not achieving as much as you can. Just keep going, and sooner or later you'll find your niche and you will excel at that niche.
All right, everyone. This is Dr. Hugo Guerrero. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Jeffrey. Take care. Bye, everyone.